The crack of splintering wood shattered the desert silence, and Willa Anderson felt her stomach drop as the stagecoach lurched violently to one side, throwing her against the dusty window frame hard enough to bruise her shoulder. "Everyone hold on," the driver shouted from above, but his warning came too late as the coach tilted at a dangerous angle, the sound of breaking wood mixing with the panicked whinnying of horses and the screams of her fellow passengers. When the world finally stopped spinning, Willa found herself sprawled across the bench seat, her carefully pinned auburn hair falling loose around her shoulders, and her traveling dress covered in a fine layer of Colorado dust. It was August 1876, and she had been traveling from Denver to Alamosa for nearly 2 days to take up a position as a schoolteacher, her first job since completing her education at 22 years old. "Is everyone all right?" she called out, pushing herself upright and checking on the elderly couple who had been dozing across from her. They nodded shakily, and Willa helped the woman straighten her bonnet before climbing carefully out of the tilted coach. The scene outside made her heart sink. The rear axle had snapped completely, and one of the large wooden wheels lay several feet away, having rolled off when the axle gave way. The driver, a grizzled man named Thompson, was already unhitching the horses, his face grim in the late afternoon sun. "How bad is it?" Willa asked, shading her eyes against the glare as she surveyed the endless expanse of scrubland surrounding them. "Bad enough," Thompson said, spitting tobacco juice into the dirt. "This axle is beyond fixing out here. We are about 15 miles outside of Alamosa, and I will have to ride into town to get help. That means you folks will be waiting here until tomorrow at the earliest." The elderly couple, the Hendersons, looked distressed at this news. Mrs. Henderson clutched her husband's arm. "We cannot stay out here all night. I have a weak constitution and the night air will be terrible for my lungs." "I am sorry, madam, but there is nothing else to be done," Thompson said, clearly frustrated with the situation himself. "Unless you want to try riding one of these horses bareback all the way to town." "That will not be necessary." The voice came from behind them, deep and calm, and Willa spun around to see a man on horseback approaching from the north. He sat tall in his saddle, wearing dusty work clothes and a wide-brimmed hat that shaded his face from the sun. As he drew closer, Willa could make out strong features tanned from years of outdoor work, dark hair that curled slightly at his collar, and eyes the color of creek water in summer. He looked to be in his late 20s, and something about the confident way he carried himself suggested a man who knew how to handle himself in this harsh landscape. "Afternoon," he said, touching the brim of his hat as he reined in his horse. "Looks like you folks have run into some trouble." "Axle broke clean through," Thompson explained. "I was just about to ride for Alamosa." The stranger surveyed the damage with a practiced eye, then looked at the group of stranded passengers. His gaze lingered on Willa for a moment, and she felt an unexpected flutter in her chest before firmly pushing the feeling aside. This was hardly the time for such foolishness. "My cabin is about 3 miles west of here," the man said. "It is not much, but it has 4 walls and a roof. You folks are welcome to wait there while Thompson goes for help. Be a lot more comfortable than sitting out here in the sun, and safer too once night falls." "We would be most grateful," Mr. Henderson said immediately, relief evident in his voice. "Would not we, dear?" His wife nodded enthusiastically, and Thompson looked relieved as well. Only Willa hesitated, years of her mother's warnings about trusting strangers echoing in her mind. But what choice did they have? The alternative was spending the night exposed to whatever dangers the Colorado wilderness might hold. "That is very kind of you, mister." She trailed off, waiting for him to supply his name. "Oakley." Jackson Oakley, but most folks call me Jack." He dismounted with easy grace and extended his hand first to Mr. Henderson, then to his wife. When he reached Willa, she felt the rough calluses of a working man as his large hand engulfed hers. "And you are, Willa Anderson. I am traveling to Alamosa to teach at the school there." Something flickered in his eyes, respect perhaps. "A teacher. That is admirable work. The town will be glad to have you." He turned to Thompson. "Why do you not get started for Alamosa while there is still plenty of daylight? I will get these folks settled, and you can bring back whatever you need to fix the coach." Thompson needed no further encouragement. Within minutes, he had saddled one of the horses and was riding south toward town, leaving the 3 passengers with this stranger who had appeared so conveniently. Jack Oakley proved to be a man of action rather than words. He efficiently helped the Hendersons gather their essential belongings from the coach, then boosted Mrs. Henderson onto his horse while Mr. Henderson walked alongside. Willa insisted on walking as well, carrying her small traveling bag and trying not to think about how much her feet were already aching in her tight button-up boots. The 3-mile walk seemed longer in the afternoon heat, but Jack kept up a steady stream of conversation that helped pass the time. He told them he had been ranching in this area for 5 years, running cattle on a modest spread he had built up from nothing. He had come into this part of Colorado from Kansas, looking for a fresh start after the war, though he did not elaborate on what he was starting fresh from. "Do you live alone out here?" Mrs. Henderson asked from atop the horse, her concern for propriety evident. "Yes, madam. My ranch hand, Miguel, has a place of his own about 2 miles south with his family. His wife would not stand for him living in a bunkhouse when she has a perfectly good home." Jack smiled at some private joke. "But I assure you, everything will be proper. I will sleep in the barn tonight so you ladies can have the cabin." This seemed to satisfy Mrs. Henderson, and Willa felt her own concerns ease somewhat. Jackson Oakley seemed like a decent man, rough around the edges perhaps, but genuinely kind. Still, she reminded herself not to let her guard down completely. When the cabin finally came into view, Willa was surprised by what she saw. She had expected something rough and barely habitable, but while the structure was certainly simple, it showed signs of care and attention. The logs were well chinked against the weather, the roof looked sound, and someone had even planted a small garden to one side where vegetables grew in neat rows. "It is not fancy, but it keeps the rain out," Jack said with what might have been embarrassment as he helped Mrs. Henderson dismount. "Let me just check inside and make sure everything is presentable." He disappeared through the door, and Willa heard the sounds of hasty tidying. When he emerged a few minutes later, his ears were slightly pink. "All set. There is fresh water in the barrel by the door, and I will get a fire going so you can make some coffee or tea if you would like." The inside of the cabin was sparsely furnished but clean. A large bed took up one corner, covered with a colorful quilt that looked store-bought rather than homemade. A table and 2 chairs sat near the stone fireplace, and shelves held an assortment of dishes, cooking implements, and supplies. What caught Willa's attention, however, was the small collection of books on a shelf near the bed. She moved closer, reading the spines. Shakespeare, Dickens, some poetry, and several agricultural journals. This was not what she had expected from a solitary rancher. "You are a reader," she said, unable to keep the surprise from her voice. Jack looked up from where he was building a fire, that same slight embarrassment coloring his features. "My mother insisted all her children learn to read and appreciate literature. Old habits die hard, I guess. You are welcome to borrow any of them while you are here if you would like." Before Willa could respond, Mrs. Henderson let out a small moan and sank into one of the chairs. "I am sorry, I am feeling quite faint. the excitement of the day. Immediately, both Willa and Jack sprang into action. Willa loosened the older woman's collar while Jack brought water and a damp cloth. Mr. Henderson hovered anxiously, wringing his hands. "Should I ride for a doctor?" Jack asked, genuine concern in his voice. "No, no," Mrs. Henderson said weakly. "I just need to rest. My heart is not what it used to be, and all this strain." "You take the bed," Jack insisted, "and I will make you some tea. I have some chamomile that might help settle your nerves." Over the next hour, Jack proved himself to be a surprisingly capable host. He brewed tea, produced some bread and cheese from his stores, and even managed to make Mrs. Henderson smile with a funny story about a particularly stubborn cow. Willa found herself watching him as he moved around the cabin with comfortable familiarity, noting the little things that spoke of his character. The way he made sure Mrs. Henderson was comfortable before seeing to his own needs. The respectful way he spoke to Mr. Henderson, asking his opinion about the best route for Thompson to bring the wagon parts. The careful way he avoided any impropriety with Willa, keeping a polite distance even in the small space. As evening approached, Jack excused himself to tend to his horse and check on his cattle. "I will be back before dark," he said, "and I will bring Miguel and his wife, Rosa, if they are home. Rosa can stay with you ladies tonight, which will be more proper than just me sleeping in the barn." After he left, Mrs. Henderson gave Willa a knowing look. "What a fine young man! And unmarried, you say?" "He did not say one way or another," Willa replied, trying to keep her tone neutral even as she felt heat rise to her cheeks. "He is not wearing a ring," Mr. Henderson observed. "And there are no signs of a woman living here. A bachelor, I would wager." "That is none of our business," Willa said firmly, though she had noticed the same things herself. "He is being kind to help us, and we should not repay that kindness with gossip." But despite her words, she found her thoughts returning to Jack Oakley as she helped prepare a simple supper from his supplies. There was something about him that drew her attention, though she could not quite put her finger on what it was. Perhaps it was the contradiction he presented. The rough cowboy with the gentle hands, the solitary rancher with a shelf full of Shakespeare, the strong, capable man who brewed chamomile tea for an anxious elderly woman. When he returned as the sun was setting, he was alone. "Miguel and Rosa were not home," he explained. "But I brought extra blankets, and I promise you will be quite safe. I will bed down in the barn, and I am a light sleeper. If you need anything at all, just call out." "You are going to too much trouble," Willa protested. "This is your home. We cannot drive you out of it." "It is no trouble at all, Miss Anderson. My mother would tan my hide if I showed any less hospitality to folks in need." He smiled, and Willa felt that flutter in her chest again. "Besides, I have slept in worse places than a clean barn. At least the hay is fresh." They shared a simple meal as darkness fell, and Willa found herself engaged in the most interesting conversation she had had in months. Jack asked thoughtful questions about her plans for teaching, and she found herself sharing her hopes and worries about starting this new chapter of her life. "I confess I am a bit nervous," she admitted. "I have never been so far from home before. My family is in Denver, and Alamosa feels like the edge of the world." "It can be isolated," Jack acknowledged, "but there is a good community there. Folks look out for each other. And the children will be lucky to have a teacher who cares about doing the job well. The last teacher we had was more interested in the bottle than in books." Willa asked. "I am on the school board," Jack explained. "We have been searching for a new teacher for months. If I had known you were coming, I would have ensured the road was in better condition." He said it with a straight face, but there was a twinkle in his eye that made Willa laugh. "I doubt even a school board member has control over when stagecoach axles decide to break." "True enough. Though if I did have that power, I might have exercised it anyway." Willa felt her breath catch at the implication in his words, and their eyes met across the table. For a moment, the air between them seemed charged with something she could not name, a recognition of sorts, as though they had known each other far longer than a few hours. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat, breaking the spell. "It has been a long day. I think my wife and I should retire." "Of course," Jack said, rising from his seat. "Miss Anderson, you should take the bed with Mrs. Henderson. Mr. Henderson, I can make you a comfortable pallet by the fire." "Nonsense," the older man said. "You should sleep in your own home." "I will take the barn, and you can stay here to keep watch over the ladies." "I absolutely cannot allow that," Jack said firmly. "You are my guests." They argued good-naturedly for several minutes until Willa finally suggested that both men sleep in the cabin, one by the fire and one on the floor near the door, while she and Mrs. Henderson shared the bed. It was not perfectly proper, but it was practical, and Mrs. Henderson's health was more important than rigid adherence to social conventions. Once they had all settled for the night, Willa lay awake in the darkness, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the Colorado night. Coyotes howled in the distance, and she could hear the gentle snoring of Mr. Henderson near the fireplace. From somewhere closer came the quiet, steady breathing that she knew must be Jack. She thought about the strange turn her journey had taken. This morning, she had been a woman traveling alone to start a new life, armed with nothing but her education and her determination to make her own way in the world. Now she was lying in a stranger's bed, in a stranger's home, and feeling safer than she had in weeks of travel. There was something about Jack Oakley that inspired trust. It was not just his kindness or his courtesy, though those were certainly part of it. It was something deeper, a sense that he was a man who lived by a code of honor that was increasingly rare in these rough times. He reminded her of her father, who had passed away 3 years earlier, a good man who had always said that character was measured by how you treated those who could do nothing for you in return. Jack was asking for nothing from them. He was simply helping because it was the right thing to do. The thought warmed her even as the night air grew cool, and she finally drifted off to sleep with a small smile on her face. She woke to the smell of coffee and frying bacon. Sunlight streamed through the small window, and she could hear the quiet murmur of male voices. Sitting up carefully so as not to disturb Mrs. Henderson, who was still sleeping, Willa smoothed her hair as best she could, and made herself presentable before emerging from behind the blanket Jack had hung for privacy. Jack was at the stove, cooking breakfast with the same easy competence he seemed to bring to everything. Mr. Henderson sat at the table, and a third man she did not recognize stood near the door. He was shorter than Jack, with dark hair and eyes and skin tanned even darker than Jack's from long hours in the sun. "Miss Anderson," Jack said warmly. "Good morning. This is Miguel Ortiz, my ranch hand and friend. Miguel, this is Miss Willa Anderson, the new schoolteacher for Alamosa." Miguel swept his hat off and gave a slight bow. "It is an honor, Miss Anderson. My Rosa will be very happy to meet you. She has been hoping for a good teacher for our children." "You have children?" Willa asked, accepting the cup of coffee Jack handed her. "3," Miguel said proudly. "2 boys and a girl. Little Maria is 6 and ready to start learning her letters." "I look forward to meeting them all," Willa said sincerely. Over breakfast, Miguel reported that he had met Thompson on the road just after dawn. The driver had stayed overnight in Alamosa and was returning with a blacksmith and the necessary materials to repair the axle. They should arrive by mid-afternoon. "So you will be on your way soon," Jack said, and Willa thought she detected a note of regret in his voice. Or perhaps that was just wishful thinking on her part. The morning passed pleasantly enough. Mrs. Henderson woke feeling much better, and Rosa arrived with a basket of fresh tortillas and a cheerful smile that lit up the small cabin. She was a round, pretty woman about Willa's age, and she and Miguel exchanged such loving glances that Willa felt a pang of something that might have been envy. Rosa insisted on showing Willa the garden, and the two women spent an hour talking about everything from vegetables to children to the challenges of making a home in this wild country. "You will like Alamosa," Rosa assured her. "It is small, yes, but the people are good. And you will be much appreciated. Education is so important, especially for the children who will build the future of Colorado." "I hope I can live up to their expectations," Willa said. "You will," Rosa said with confidence. "I can tell. You have the look of someone who cares, who will not give up when things get hard." She glanced back at the cabin where Jack and Miguel were examining some piece of tack. "And maybe you will find other reasons to be happy here, yes." Willa felt herself blushing. "I do not know what you mean." "No." Rosa's eyes sparkled with mischief. "I have known Jack for 3 years, since he came to this place. Never have I seen him look at a woman the way he looks at you, and never have I seen him so eager to make a good impression." "We only just met," Willa protested weakly. "Sometimes that is all it takes. When Miguel and I met, I knew within an hour that he was the man I would marry. The heart knows what it knows." Willa wanted to dismiss Rosa's words as romantic fancy, but she could not quite manage it, because the truth was, she felt it too. That strange sense of recognition, of rightness, that had struck her the moment Jack Oakley had ridden up to their broken-down stagecoach. It was foolish and impractical and completely unlike her usually sensible self, but she could not deny the flutter in her chest every time he looked at her, or the way her pulse raced when their hands accidentally brushed as he handed her a plate. She was saved from having to respond by the sound of wagon wheels. Thompson had returned, accompanied by a burly blacksmith and his apprentice. The next few hours were filled with the noise of repairs, and Willa found herself helping Rosa prepare lunch for the work crew while Mrs. Henderson supervised from a comfortable chair in the shade. Jack worked alongside the blacksmith, his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal muscled forearms, sweat dampening his hair. Willa tried not to stare, but she found her gaze drawn to him again and again. There was something compelling about watching a man who was truly competent at his work, who knew exactly what needed to be done and did it without hesitation. When the repairs were finally complete, and Thompson announced they could be on their way, Willa felt an unexpected reluctance. She had been in this place less than 24 hours, yet leaving felt wrong somehow, as though she was walking away from something important. She gathered her belongings slowly, taking one last look around the cabin that had sheltered them. Jack appeared in the doorway, his hat in his hands. "I wanted to thank you again," Willa said. "Your kindness meant more than you know." "It was my pleasure," Jack said quietly. "I hope your time in Alamosa is everything you hope it will be." There was so much more she wanted to say, but the Hendersons were already in the coach, and Thompson was calling for her to hurry. She moved toward the door, then stopped. "Perhaps you might visit Alamosa sometime," she said, the words tumbling out before she could overthink them. "To attend to school board business. I would welcome your advice as I get settled in my new position." Jack's face brightened. "I attend the monthly board meetings. The next one is in 2 weeks. I could call on you then if that would be appropriate." "I would like that very much." They stood there for a moment longer, the air between them heavy with unspoken words. Then Rosa called out that the coach was ready, and the spell was broken. Willa climbed aboard, and as the coach pulled away, she turned to look back. Jack stood in front of his cabin, one hand raised in farewell, growing smaller in the distance until the coach rounded a bend and he disappeared from view. "Well," Mrs. Henderson said with satisfaction, "that was quite an adventure." "Indeed," her husband agreed. "And that young Mr. Oakley was quite the gentleman. Do you not think so, Miss Anderson?" "Yes," Willa said softly, her eyes still on the window. "Quite the gentleman." The rest of the journey to Alamosa passed without incident, and by evening Willa was installed in her new lodgings, a small room in the boarding house run by a widow named Mrs. Colby. The room was clean and comfortable, with a view of the main street, and Mrs. Colby herself was a kindly woman who immediately took Willa under her wing. "The whole town has been waiting for you," she said, as she showed Willa around. "We have been without a proper teacher for 6 months, and the children are running wild." Well, not wild exactly, but certainly in need of structure and learning. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of activity. Willa threw herself into preparing for the start of school, cleaning the one-room schoolhouse, organizing the few books and supplies available, and meeting with the families whose children would be in her care. Everyone was welcoming, and she began to feel that she might truly make a home here in this small Colorado town. But despite her busy days, she found her thoughts returning again and again to Jack Oakley. She replayed their conversations in her mind, analyzed every look and gesture, and tried to convince herself that she was being ridiculous. She barely knew the man. One day of acquaintance was hardly enough to base these feelings on. Yet the feelings persisted, and as the day of the school board meeting approached, she found herself growing increasingly nervous and excited. She took extra care with her appearance that evening, choosing her best dress, a deep blue that her sister had always said brought out her eyes, and arranging her hair in a style that was professional yet flattering. Mrs. Colby noticed and gave her a knowing smile but said nothing. The meeting was held in the small building that served as both town hall and courthouse. When Willa arrived, she found 5 men seated around a table, including the mayor, the minister, and the owner of the general store. And there, at the far end of the table, was Jack. Their eyes met as she entered, and his whole face lit up with a smile that made her heart race. "Miss Anderson," the mayor said, rising to greet her. "Welcome. We are so pleased to have you in Alamosa. Please sit down." The meeting itself was businesslike enough. They discussed the school budget, the need for new textbooks, and the schedule for the upcoming term. Willa presented her plans for the curriculum, and the board members nodded approvingly. Jack said little during the official proceedings, but she was acutely aware of his presence, of the way he watched her as she spoke. When the meeting concluded, the other board members filed out quickly, but Jack lingered, helping to put away the chairs. "You seem well settled," he said once they were alone. "I am. Everyone has been very welcoming." She paused, gathering her courage. "I wondered if you might like to take a walk. It is a pleasant evening, and I could use the fresh air after sitting for so long." "I would like that very much." They walked down Main Street as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. At first, they talked of inconsequential things: the weather, the town, her preparations for school. But gradually the conversation deepened. "I thought about you," Jack admitted, "these past 2 weeks. Wondered how you were settling in, if you were happy with your decision to come here." "I thought about you too," Willa confessed. "More than I probably should have, given that we barely know each other. That seems like something we could remedy." They had reached the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to open land. Jack stopped walking and turned to face her. "Miss Anderson, Willa, if I may be so bold, I am not a man given to flights of fancy. I am practical, maybe too practical. But from the moment I saw you standing by that broken-down coach, something in me recognized something in you. I know it sounds crazy. We have spent maybe a total of 10 hours in each other's company. but I would like to spend more time with you, to see if what I feel is real or just the foolishness of a lonely man." Willa's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he must be able to hear it. "It does not sound crazy to me, because I feel it too." The smile that crossed his face was like the sun breaking through clouds. "Then maybe we could have dinner tomorrow. I could come into town and we could eat at the hotel restaurant, properly chaperoned, all very respectable." "I would like that." They walked back to the boarding house in comfortable silence, and when they reached the door, Jack took her hand and brought it to his lips in a gesture that was both old-fashioned and utterly charming. "Until tomorrow, then." Willa floated up to her room, and when Mrs. Colby gave her a questioning look, she could not help the smile that spread across her face. "He asked to have dinner with me tomorrow." "That Jack Oakley is a good man," Mrs. Colby said approvingly. "A bit rough around the edges, perhaps, but solid. The kind of man you can depend on when times get hard." And times in Colorado in 1876 could get very hard indeed, Willa knew. But for the first time since leaving Denver, she felt truly hopeful about her future. The next evening, Jack arrived promptly at 6 o'clock, wearing what were clearly his best clothes and with his hair still damp from washing. They walked to the hotel restaurant together, and if the curious stares of the townspeople bothered either of them, they gave no sign. Over dinner, they talked about their pasts. Willa learned that Jack had grown up in Kansas, the youngest of 4 children, and had served briefly in the Union Army at the tail end of the war despite being only 17. He had come to Colorado seeking land and opportunity, working as a ranch hand for several years before saving enough to buy his own small spread. "It is not much yet," he said. "Maybe 100 head of cattle, a cabin that needs work, land that needs more work. But it is mine, bought and paid for with honest labor. I am building something that will last, something I can be proud of." "That is admirable," Willa said. "So many men are content to drift from place to place, but you have put down roots." "What about you?" Jack asked. "Why teaching? Why here?" Willa took a sip of her water, considering her answer. "After my father died, I realized I did not want to be dependent on others for my livelihood. My mother expected me to marry, to let a husband provide for me, but I wanted more than that. I wanted to be useful, to have a purpose beyond being someone's wife. Teaching gives me that. And coming to Alamosa, away from Denver and my family's expectations, gives me the freedom to be myself." "That takes courage," Jack said quietly. "A lot of people do not have the strength to go after what they want. Sometimes I wonder if I am being selfish. My mother certainly thinks so. It is not selfish to want to make your own choices." Jack leaned forward, his eyes intense. "You should live your life for yourself, not for what others expect of you." They talked until the restaurant began to close, and then they walked slowly back to the boarding house, both reluctant for the evening to end. "May I see you again?" Jack asked as they reached her door. "I would be disappointed if you did not. I have some business in town next Saturday. Perhaps we could have a picnic." "That sounds lovely." Saturday could not come fast enough for Willa. The week dragged by despite her busy schedule of preparing lesson plans and organizing her classroom. When Saturday finally arrived, she woke early and helped Mrs. Colby prepare a basket of food for the picnic. Jack arrived mid-morning with a wagon rather than on horseback. "I thought you might prefer it," he explained. "More comfortable for a lady." They drove out of town to a spot Jack knew along the creek, where cottonwood trees provided shade and the water ran clear over smooth stones. They spread a blanket on the grass and unpacked the basket, and for a while, they simply enjoyed the peaceful setting and each other's company. "Tell me about your ranch," Willa said. "What is a typical day like for you?" Jack stretched out on the blanket, propped up on one elbow. "Up before dawn, usually. check on the cattle, fix whatever broke the day before, because something always breaks. Mend fences, tend the horses, work on improving the cabin and the outbuildings. Miguel helps, and during busy times like branding or roundup, we hire on a few extra hands. It is hard work, but honest work. I sleep well at night knowing I have earned my rest. It sounds like a good life. It can be lonely, though, Jack admitted. That was one of the things I did not anticipate when I set out on my own. How quiet it gets when you are the only person for miles around. How you can go days sometimes without speaking to another soul. Willa understood that loneliness, though hers was different. She had been surrounded by people in Denver, but she had still felt isolated, trapped by expectations and conventions that did not fit who she was or wanted to be. "You ever regret it?" she asked. "The isolation, the hard work?" "No," Jack said without hesitation. "I would rather have this, even with the loneliness, than go back to working for someone else, building their dreams instead of my own, though I admit the loneliness has felt heavier these past weeks." "Why these past weeks?" He sat up and turned to face her fully. "Because I have met someone who makes me wish I had more to offer. Someone who makes me think about the future differently, about what it might be like to share this life I am building." Willa's breath caught. They had known each other less than a month, but she could not deny the intensity of her feelings. Every moment with Jack felt right in a way nothing else in her life ever had. "Jack," she said softly, "I feel the same way. It frightens me a little how much I feel when we have known each other such a short time." "It frightens me too," he admitted. "I keep thinking I should slow down, be more cautious. But then I see you, and all those sensible thoughts fly right out of my head." He reached for her hand, and she let him take it, feeling the warmth of his calloused palm against hers. "I would like to court you properly," he said. "If you will have me. I know I am just a rancher with more dreams than money, and you are an educated woman who could probably do much better. But I promise you I am honest and I am hardworking, and I would do everything in my power to make you happy." "Yes," Willa said, tears pricking her eyes. "Yes, I would very much like that." Jack's face broke into the widest smile she had seen from him yet, and he brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that sent shivers down her spine. They spent the rest of the afternoon by the creek, talking about everything and nothing, learning the details of each other's lives. Willa discovered that Jack had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard and made her laugh until her sides hurt. Jack learned that Willa could recite long passages of poetry from memory, and had a passionate belief in the power of education to change lives. As the sun began to lower in the sky, they packed up reluctantly and headed back to town. When Jack helped Willa down from the wagon in front of the boarding house, his hands lingered at her waist just a moment longer than necessary, and their eyes met in a look that spoke volumes. "Until next time," he said softly. "Next Saturday?" Willa asked hopefully. "I will be here." The next months fell into a pattern that Willa came to cherish. Her days were filled with teaching, her evenings often occupied with correcting schoolwork or preparing lessons. But every Saturday, Jack would come to town, and they would spend precious hours together. Sometimes they would picnic by the creek. Other times they would walk through town or attend church together on Sunday mornings before he had to head back to his ranch. They talked about everything. Willa shared her dreams of expanding the school, of creating a library for the town. Jack spoke of his plans for the ranch, of the house he wanted to build one day, bigger and better than the cabin, a real home with proper rooms and glass windows. The physical aspect of their relationship developed slowly, constrained by the propriety of the time and their own respect for each other. A held hand, a kiss on the cheek, the brush of fingers as they walked side by side. But beneath these small gestures ran a current of deeper feeling, a growing certainty that this was real and lasting. The town watched their courtship with approval. Jack Oakley was well respected, and people were pleased to see him finding happiness. Willa received several visits from townswomen, who made a point of telling her what a good man Jack was, how lucky she was to have caught his attention. Mrs. Colby became Willa's confidante, listening to her talk about Jack and offering gentle advice. "Do not rush into anything," she cautioned. "But do not let fear hold you back either. When you find the right person, you know it in your bones." As winter approached, bringing cold winds down from the mountains, Jack's visits became more challenging. The weather could turn dangerous quickly, and Willa worried every time he made the journey to town. One Saturday, in late November, a snowstorm blew in unexpectedly. Jack had arrived in town that morning, and by afternoon, the wind was howling and snow was falling so heavily that visibility dropped to almost nothing. "You cannot possibly ride back tonight," Willa said, watching the storm from the window of the hotel restaurant where they had been having coffee. "It is too dangerous." "I will get a room at the hotel," Jack agreed, "though I hate to waste the money when I have a perfectly good cabin just a few hours away." "Better to waste a little money than freeze to death on the trail," Willa said firmly. Jack smiled at her vehemence. "Yes, madam. I will do as you say." The storm lasted 3 days, trapping Jack in town. He made himself useful, helping shovel snow and assisting some of the older residents with tasks they could not manage themselves. In the evenings, he and Willa would sit in the parlor of the boarding house, properly chaperoned by Mrs. Colby, and talk by the fire. It was during one of these evenings that Jack first said the words that had been building between them for months. "I love you, Willa," he said quietly, his hand holding hers. "I know I should probably wait longer to say it, court you for a proper amount of time, but life is uncertain and I do not want to leave things unsaid." Willa's heart swelled with emotion. "I love you too, Jack. I think I have loved you since that first day when you offered help to a group of strangers without a thought for yourself. Then I have a question to ask you, though the timing is not ideal, and I do not have a ring to offer you yet." He shifted so that he was kneeling beside her chair, and Willa's breath caught as she realized what was happening. "Willa Anderson, would you do me the great honor of becoming my wife? I know my life is not easy, and I cannot offer you the comforts you might have in a city. But I can promise you my whole heart, my loyalty, and my best efforts to build a life we can both be proud of." Tears streamed down Willa's face as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." Jack pulled her into his arms and they held each other as Mrs. Colby discreetly left the room to give them a moment of privacy. When they finally pulled apart, both were smiling through their tears. "I will build you a house," Jack promised. "A real house with a parlor and a kitchen and a bedroom with windows that catch the morning sun. I will work every day to make sure you never regret saying yes." "I could never regret it," Willa said, touching his face gently. "You are everything I did not know I was looking for." They set a wedding date for the following spring, giving Jack time to prepare and Willa time to finish out the school year. The winter months passed in a blur of planning and anticipation. Jack worked tirelessly on his ranch, starting construction on the house he had promised, calling in favors from neighbors to help with the building. Willa continued teaching, though she knew that marriage might mean giving up her position. Married women were not generally expected to work outside the home, especially not as teachers. But when she tentatively brought up the subject with Jack, he surprised her. "I know teaching is important to you," he said. "If you want to continue, we will find a way to make it work. The ranch is only a few miles from town, and I can drive you in the mornings and pick you up in the evenings when the weather allows. "You would do that for me." "I would do anything for you," Jack said simply. "I did not fall in love with you expecting you to give up who you are. Your passion for teaching is part of what I love about you." Willa's mother came for a visit in March, ostensibly to help with wedding preparations, but actually to inspect Jack and determine whether her daughter was making a terrible mistake. Willa was nervous about the meeting, knowing her mother's tendency to be critical and her disappointment that Willa had not married someone from their social circle in Denver. But Jack won her over, just as he had won over everyone else. He was respectful without being obsequious, answered her pointed questions honestly, and showed such genuine love for Willa that even her mother's stern facade cracked. "He is a good man," she admitted to Willa privately. "Rough, perhaps, and not what I envisioned for you, but he loves you truly. I can see it in every look he gives you." The wedding took place on a beautiful day in early May, with wildflowers blooming across the prairie, and the mountains standing clear and sharp against the blue sky. The ceremony was held in the small church in Alamosa, with what seemed like the entire town in attendance. Willa wore a dress of cream-colored silk that her mother had brought from Denver, and she carried a bouquet of wildflowers that Rosa had helped her pick that morning. Jack wore a new suit, looking both handsome and slightly uncomfortable in the formal clothes. As they stood before the minister and exchanged their vows, Willa felt a profound sense of rightness. This man, this life, this choice, it was all exactly what she wanted. "I, Jack Oakley, take you, Willa Anderson, to be my lawfully wedded wife," Jack said, his voice steady and sure. "I promise to love you, honor you, and cherish you in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for as long as we both shall live." When it was her turn, Willa spoke her vows with equal conviction, and when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Jack's kiss was gentle and full of promise. The reception was held at the hotel, with food and music and dancing. Willa had never been much of a dancer, but in Jack's arms she felt graceful and light. They moved together naturally, as though they had been dancing together for years rather than minutes. As the sun set and the party began to wind down, Jack and Willa slipped away to the wagon that would take them to their new home. The house Jack had built stood about 4 miles outside of town, close enough to be convenient but far enough to offer privacy and peace. When they arrived and Jack lifted her over the threshold, Willa gasped in delight. The house was everything he had promised and more. It was not large or fancy, but it was solid and well built, with 2 bedrooms, a spacious kitchen, and a parlor with large windows that would indeed catch the morning light. "You like it?" Jack asked, suddenly nervous. "I love it," Willa said honestly. "It is perfect." That night, as they lay together in the bed Jack had built with his own hands, Willa felt a completeness she had never known before. She had found not just a husband, but a true partner, someone who respected her dreams even as he shared his own. "Happy?" Jack asked, pulling her close. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," Willa replied, and kissed him with all the love in her heart. The early days of their marriage were an adjustment, as all marriages are. Willa continued teaching through the end of the school term, and Jack drove her to town each morning and picked her up each afternoon, just as he had promised. She learned to help with the ranch work in the evenings and on weekends, discovering muscles she had not known she possessed and developing skills she would never have learned in Denver. Jack proved to be a patient teacher, showing her how to tend the garden, care for the chickens, and even help with some of the lighter ranch work. In turn, Willa introduced more books into their home, reading aloud to Jack in the evenings by lamplight, sharing the poetry and stories she loved. They developed routines and rituals that became the foundation of their life together. Morning coffee on the porch, watching the sun rise over the mountains. evening walks to check on the cattle, Sunday dinners with Miguel, Rosa, and their children, who adopted Willa as a beloved aunt. When summer came and school let out, Willa threw herself into making their house a true home. She sewed curtains for the windows, planted flowers around the porch, and worked with Jack to build furniture they could not afford to buy. She discovered a talent for cooking that she had never developed in her mother's house, where they had employed a cook, and took pride in preparing meals that fueled Jack through his long days of work. But it was not all domestic bliss. Life on a ranch was hard and sometimes dangerous. Cattle could sicken and die. Fences needed constant repair. The weather could turn violent without warning, bringing hail that damaged crops or drought that dried up streams. Money was tight, and there were times when Willa wondered if they would make it through the winter. Through it all, their love deepened and matured. They learned to communicate, to work together, to support each other through the hard times. When Willa mourned the loss of their first attempt at a vegetable garden to an early frost, Jack held her and helped her plan for the next season. When Jack lost several head of cattle to disease, Willa sat up with him through the night, offering comfort and practical help in equal measure. By the time autumn arrived and school started again, Willa had to make a difficult decision. She was pregnant, a development that filled both her and Jack with joy and trepidation. She wanted to continue teaching, but she also knew that the physical demands would become difficult as her pregnancy progressed. In the end, she worked out an arrangement with the school board to teach through the end of the year, with the understanding that she would take a leave for the birth and the months following. It was not ideal, but it allowed her to keep the work she loved while also preparing for motherhood. Jack was overjoyed about the baby, though he tried to hide his worry about the dangers of childbirth. He had lost his own mother to complications from the birth of his youngest sister, and Willa knew the fear was always in the back of his mind. "I am strong," she assured him. "And we will have the doctor from Alamosa here when my time comes. Everything will be fine." She taught through the winter, her belly growing until the students began to notice and whisper among themselves. When she finally had to step down in late March, the whole town threw a party in her honor, presenting her with baby clothes and blankets that the women had sewn. 2 weeks later, on a warm April night, Willa went into labor. Jack rode frantically to town to fetch the doctor while Rosa stayed with Willa, calmly coaching her through the early contractions. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Jack paced outside the bedroom door, listening to Willa's cries and feeling helpless. But when the first wail of the baby finally filled the air, he burst into the room to find Willa exhausted but smiling, holding a small bundle wrapped in one of the blankets the townswomen had made. "A son," the doctor announced. "Healthy and strong, just like his mother." Jack approached the bed with reverence, looking down at the tiny red face of his firstborn child. "He is perfect," he whispered, tears streaming down his face. "What should we name him?" Willa asked, exhausted but happier than she had ever been. They had discussed names, but now, looking at their son, Jack knew exactly what felt right. "Thomas, after my father, Thomas James Oakley." "Thomas," Willa repeated, testing the name. "I like it. Hello, Thomas." The baby's arrival changed everything and nothing. Their days were now punctuated by feedings and diaper changes, by sleepless nights and the constant worry that comes with caring for a helpless infant. But through it all, their love for each other only grew stronger. Jack proved to be a devoted father, taking on extra work around the house so Willa could rest, walking the floor with Thomas when he cried in the night, and looking at his son with such wonder that it made Willa's heart swell. When Thomas was 6 months old, Willa began to think about returning to teaching, but she found that her priorities had shifted. The work was still important to her, but not as important as being home with her son, watching him grow and change every day. What if we started our own school? She suggested to Jack one evening. A small one, here on the ranch. I could teach the children of the neighboring families, including Miguel and Rosa's children. They would not have to make the long trip into town, and I could still be home with Thomas. Jack loved the idea. Over the next months, they converted one of the unused outbuildings into a small schoolroom. Willa spread the word, and by the time Thomas was a year old, she had 8 students ranging in age from 6 to 12. It was the perfect solution. She could teach in the mornings and early afternoons, then tend to Thomas and her household duties the rest of the day. The children thrived under her instruction, and their parents were grateful to have education so close at hand. The years passed in a blur of happiness. Thomas grew from a baby into a bright, energetic little boy who loved following his father around the ranch. When he was 3, Willa gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah, a calm, sweet baby who seemed to bring even more light into their lives. The ranch prospered as well. Jack's hard work and careful management paid off, and they were able to buy more land and expand their herd. They added onto the house, creating more bedrooms and a larger kitchen. Jack built Willa a proper schoolhouse with desks and a blackboard and shelves for books. On their 5th anniversary, Jack surprised Willa with a set of encyclopedias he had ordered from a catalog. An extravagant expense, but one that brought her such joy that he said it was worth every penny. "You have given me everything," Willa said, holding one of the heavy volumes and running her hand over the embossed cover. "A home, a family, a purpose. I never imagined I could be this happy." "You gave me just as much," Jack replied, pulling her into his arms. "You turned a house into a home. You gave me children I adore. You made me believe that I could build something lasting and good. Every day with you is a gift." They kissed, the kind of kiss that still made Willa's heart race even after 5 years of marriage, and she marveled at how a broken stagecoach wheel had led her to this moment, this life, this love. More children followed. Another son, William, who had his mother's auburn hair and his father's quiet determination. Then twin girls, Emma and Ellen, who kept Willa and Jack on their toes with their energy and mischief. The schoolhouse Willa had started grew as well, attracting students from farther afield. She hired an assistant teacher, a young woman fresh from teacher training in Denver, and together they educated the children of ranchers and farmers from all over the county. Jack became one of the largest ranchers in the area, respected for his fair dealing and his willingness to help neighbors in need. He served on the town council and remained on the school board, always advocating for better education and more resources for teachers like Willa. But despite their success and the busyness of their lives, they never lost sight of what mattered most. Every Saturday, no matter how much work needed doing, they would take a few hours to be together, just the two of them. Sometimes they would ride out to the creek where they had picnicked during their courtship. Other times they would simply sit on the porch after the children were in bed, holding hands and talking about their day. "You ever regret it?" Jack asked one evening when they had been married nearly 15 years. "Giving up the life you could have had in Denver, the opportunities you might have had elsewhere." Willa looked at him in genuine surprise. "Never, not once. This life, here with you and our children, is better than anything I could have dreamed of back then. You gave me freedom, Jack. The freedom to be myself, to pursue my passions, to build something meaningful. How could I ever regret that? I worry sometimes that I have not given you enough. You are educated and accomplished, and I am just a rancher who reads Shakespeare in the evenings." "You are the man I love," Willa said firmly. "The man who respects my dreams and supports my work. The man who makes me laugh and holds me when I cry. The man who built this beautiful life with me, one day at a time. You are everything I need and more than I deserve." Jack pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "I am the lucky one. I was just a lonely cowboy with a small ranch and big dreams. You made all those dreams come true." As the years continued to pass, Willa and Jack watched their children grow into capable, kind young people. Thomas followed in his father's footsteps, learning the ranch business and eventually taking over more and more of the day-to-day operations. Sarah became a teacher like her mother, taking a position in Alamosa, and boarding with Mrs. Colby, who was now quite elderly but still sharp as a tack. William showed an aptitude for business and began handling the financial side of the ranch, keeping detailed books and finding new markets for their cattle. The twins, Emma and Ellen, were still in school but showed signs of following their own unique paths. Emma toward medicine and Ellen toward music. Willa continued teaching until she was in her 50s, finally retiring when the school had grown so large that it needed to be absorbed into the larger school system in Alamosa. She had taught hundreds of students over the years, many of whom went on to successful careers, and always credited her with inspiring their love of learning. Jack ran the ranch until he was in his 60s, when he finally admitted that maybe it was time to let the younger generation take over. He and Thomas worked out an arrangement where Thomas would run the day-to-day operations, while Jack remained available for advice and consultation. It was a good arrangement that allowed Jack and Willa to finally have some time to themselves. They took trips, visiting their children and grandchildren who had scattered across Colorado and beyond. They read together, debated politics and philosophy, and enjoyed the simple pleasure of each other's company. On a warm summer evening, nearly 40 years after that stagecoach had broken down and brought them together, Willa and Jack sat on their porch watching the sun set over the mountains. Their hair was silver now, their faces lined with the years, but their hands were still intertwined just as they had been at the beginning. "You remember that first day?" Willa asked. "When you came riding up and offered to help a group of stranded strangers?" "I remember thinking you were the most beautiful woman I had ever seen," Jack said. "Standing there in the dust with your hair falling down, looking fierce and determined. I fell in love with you right then, though I did not admit it to myself at the time." "I was terrified," Willa admitted. "Of you, of the situation, of this whole wild country, but there was something about you that made me feel safe. You looked at me like I mattered, like my thoughts and opinions were worth hearing." "They were, they are." Jack squeezed her hand. "You were always worth listening to." "We have had a good life, have not we?" Willa said softly. "The best life," Jack agreed. "Better than I ever imagined when I was a young man just trying to carve out a place for myself in this territory. You made it all worthwhile, Willa. Every struggle, every hardship, it was all worth it because I got to face it with you by my side." Willa leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "I love you, Jack Oakley. I have loved you for 40 years, and I will love you for however many more we have. And I love you, Willa Oakley. You were worth every mile of that broken stagecoach journey. You were worth everything." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, two people who had found each other by chance and built a lifetime together by choice. Their story had started with a broken wheel and a cowboy's kind offer, but it had grown into something far greater than either of them could have predicted. Around them, the ranch they had built together hummed with quiet evening activity. In the barn, Thomas was settling the horses for the night. In the main house that now stood where Jack's small cabin had once been, their grandchildren were getting ready for bed, giggling and whispering as children do. The schoolhouse Willa had founded stood dark now, but it would come alive again when classes resumed in the fall, filled with a new generation of students. This was their legacy, Willa thought. Not just the land or the buildings, but the family they had raised, the community they had helped build, the lives they had touched through teaching and simple kindness. It was a legacy built on love and sustained by the commitment they had made to each other all those years ago. As the moon rose over the mountains, casting silver light across the prairie, Willa and Jack remained on the porch, savoring these quiet moments together. They knew they were growing old, that their time together would not last forever. But they also knew that what they had built would endure long after they were gone, in their children and grandchildren, in the students Willa had taught, in the community that had grown up around them. The stagecoach that had broken down so many years ago had been on its way to deliver Willa to a new life in Alamosa. But the real journey had begun when Jack Oakley had offered his help to a stranded woman, and in doing so, had offered his heart. That journey had taken them through decades of joy and sorrow, triumph and struggle, always together, always united by the love that had sparked between them on a dusty Colorado road. And as they sat together under the stars, their hands still intertwined after all these years, they knew with absolute certainty that theirs was a love story for the ages, a testament to the power of taking a chance on a stranger who becomes the center of your world. The Wild West had brought them together, but it was their own courage, commitment, and abiding love that had created this beautiful life they shared. The end of their story was not an ending at all, but rather the culmination of a lifetime lived fully and well, surrounded by the fruits of their labor and the love they had nurtured through all the seasons of their lives. And that, they both agreed as they finally rose and walked hand in hand into their home, was the happiest ending anyone could hope for.